All right, everybody. We haven't officially started yet. My name is Matthew Nugent. I'm the Vice President for Donor Relations at MacArthur Society, West Point class of 1996. I am officiating the call today. Thank you all for being here. And by way of disclaimer, everybody, this is a nonpartisan group, which means we have people from both parties and different views on major issues. For this commander's call, we will focus on what unites both parties, a strong national defense, specifically what relates to West Point and other service academies. We welcome your questions on the topics and ask all attendees focus on the topics at hand, please. Okay, so now I'm going to give you to the MacArthur Society president, General Paul Vallely, class of 1802, class of 1961. Sir, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Matt. Great introduction to the Society. I'm very happy. We had a great year in 2015 as we built the Society. I'm just so happy with the staff that we have and what we've done and our participation in the commander's call that we have. But I want to thank all of you. We have some great plans for 2016. 2000, excuse me, my wife's coaching me here in this year. We're going to focus on, again, fundraising to make us very vital as far as what we're trying to do with the Academy. We're trying to work closer with the, what's the board called? I'm sorry. With the, excuse me, I had a stroke about a month ago, so I can't recall a lot of words and read. It affected my left eye. So anyhow, if I stutter, it's a little bit because of that. But we're trying to work very close with the people at West Point, and we hope to align ourselves with everybody. We're not fighting the AOG, for example. That's what I was trying to remember. But it's just a great opportunity for all of us to work for the future, building war fighters for our country, supporting our military. So we'll be coming out with our different newsletters and so on to keep everybody up to date. But anyhow, I'd like to announce two of our new board members, Brigadier General Ernie Odino, who I worked with in the Middle East for several years, and also Brigadier General Mick Zace, also PhD. His expertise has really been in his later years in education, so we're very happy to have them with us. So with that, Matt, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, General. And we're thrilled to have you alive, 6 foot above, not 6 foot below, and highly functional. We're worried about that, but thank you, sir, for all that you do. We're going to take a moment now and say the Pledge of Allegiance. You're going to see the flag. And if you are able to, please stand up with us, and I'll lead you in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. That's a beautiful picture of West Point. I tell you what, thank you, Cindy, for doing that. Okay, so now we have the bells of the ball. We have the CLT Classical Learning Test CEO, Jeremy Tate, and the liaison for Service Academy endeavors, Dr. Susan Morrow. You all have, seen their bios. You can read that. Here's the big picture. Okay, the battle is for education. If you study the enemy and their ideology, which is Marxism, and we have extensively. Okay, it's about winning through non-kinetic warfare. If you look at the 45 communist goals, it's all about non-kinetic warfare, and they have been very successful. In fact, I'll quote Stalin himself. He said, "Give me 4 years of the education, and I will own and control a country." Okay, that is reality, and we are taking our country back. Here is a book from the Secretary of War, Hegseth, who wrote, I don't know, about 5 years ago, Battle for the American Mind. And he talks about classical learning. And this is before I had ever heard of the classical learning test, the CLT. What we have here are the warriors in the non-kinetic warfare fight. What you are seeing here with Jeremy Tate and Dr. Susan Morrow, they are the physical manifestation of the will of the people through President Trump, through the Secretary of War. They would not be as elevated as they are had the Secretary of War not brought us in direction. We're thankful for that, and we're here to support the Secretary of War. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Dr. Morrow, for being here with us. You have the floor.
Amazing, Matthew. Thank you. It's incredible to be here, especially with this audience. You brought up Secretary Hegseth's book, 2022 New York Times bestseller that he co-authored with one of my best friends in the world, David Goodwin. And it makes all the sense to me that Secretary Hegseth became the Secretary of War. His passion before that, he'd been on Fox talking about the battle for the American mind. And what he had been doing was sounding the alarm. Matthew, as you put so eloquently, America's schools in many ways have been hijacked by a Marxist ideology, right? And what we have done is we have abandoned the kind of education that shaped 100% of America's founders, with no exceptions, received a classical education. I like to make a comparison with something like organic milk. Nobody called organic milk 150 years ago. That was just all milk, right? Until they started putting stuff in it. And then we came up with this term organic milk. Well, the term classical education, it just refers to education before it was hijacked by extreme Marxist ideology. It refers to education as it always was for millennia in the West, the kind of education, the traditions of Athens, Jerusalem, and Rome, that all of our founders were baptized into this intellectual tradition. And that is what gave birth to America. And that is what West Point, the Naval Academy, the Air Force Academy, the kind of education they exist to champion. And it got a little off track, maybe a lot off track, but President Trump and Secretary Hegseth are reclaiming it. And the admissions test is a key lever in being able to reclaim that.
Thank you. Dr. Morrow, would you like to add to that? In fact, one of the questions we asked in the green room and we have several questions. What are some of the main differences between the classical learning test, CLT, and the SAT or the ACT?
Well, you have to think back to why the classical learning test was born. And Jeremy's obviously the expert on that, but I will give you a little bit of background. So in 2015, Jeremy was working with students that were preparing for taking the SAT. He was involved in classical education and public education. And he realized that the SAT was just really ridiculous. And that this was even in the beginning of their spiral downward. And he took it upon his shoulders to come up with an alternative, which is a massive undertaking. And he spent the past 10 years of his life doing that.
Oh, and if I could interject into that, think about some context here for a minute. And so the SAT and ACT have completely changed from what they used to be, right? So the SAT launched a long time ago. It's their 100th anniversary. They launched in 1926. And the test remained basically unchanged until the 1990s. Now, the ACT launched in 1959 in the context of Sputnik and the space race and a concern that we were falling behind the Soviets in math and science. And they came out with a very different proposition than the SAT. The SAT was always designed to be a cognitive test to get at aptitude, cognitive ability. The ACT said that's not fair. You should measure what's being taught in the classroom, right? And so they came out with an achievement test instead of an aptitude test. Well, the ACT started to get more and more influential over the SAT. And so the SAT started to make itself just like the ACT. They both started to become an achievement test, not an aptitude test, around public school standards. Both tests aligned with the Common Core in 2015. So practically, what does this mean? Well, you remember analogies on the SAT. There are 0 analogies on the SAT. Since the AC, they've taken all of them off because they're not fair, right? They measure cognitive ability. So the SAT says it's not fair. We've removed every trace of aptitude testing. That's directly from the CEO of the College Board, David Coleman. And so there is a demand for a third option that could still provide the service academies and other colleges and universities the kind of indicator that the SAT once provided before it tried to do essentially this engineering, demographic engineering at our colleges and universities that made them get away from cognitive ability.
This is fascinating. We could talk about this for hours. What you're describing with the ACT and the SAT is the tail wagging the dog. It
Right.
seems like they wanted to test curriculum. They didn't want to test aptitude. And if, in the context of Marxism, that's how you can take an entire society down the wrong road.
Yep.
So this is fascinating. Tell us something about calculators. The SAT uses calculators. Why? And the CLT, I understand, does not use calculators. What difference does that make in terms?
Yeah, that's a great question. Matthew, I remember sitting in middle school math and my math teacher saying, you can't use calculators in my class and you can't use them on the SAT. And it was like, all right, case closed. You can't use them on the SAT. And then in 1996, they say you can use them on the SAT. And what happened? A whole generation became completely dependent on a device. You ask it, they're offering remedial math at Harvard now, remedial math at Harvard, because students are not learning how to think well. Like math is formative. It's supposed to order the brain into right thinking. And we just give kids a device, right? So that drove the practice of mathematics in the classroom. We're saying, no, we're going back to the basics. SAT and ACT, they both said no to calculators for decades. They knew what would happen, and we're trying to get back to that. And, Matthew, I think this is one of the few ideas that almost every teacher agrees with in the country is that, for better or worse, the college entrance exam will shape curriculum at the secondary level. And if it's a good test that reflects America's founding ideals, that is academically rigorous, it's going to have a good influence. But the College Board and ACT have been in a race to the bottom, right? If you think about it as like a market share game, whichever test has been a little bit easier is going to be the test that's the easier way to both scholarships and admissions. And so they've been for decades now trying to just be a little bit easier, a little bit easier, a little bit easier, until the point now where it's kind of a joke, right? I mean, the on the AP test, everybody got an extra point just because, right? A 3 became a 4. And on the SAT, just between 2015 and 16, the average score went up 80 points. So these are designed to be feel-good assessments now, and we're trying to come in and hit the reset button and bring back some academic rigor.
Here's another question, and we have several. When was the SAT renormed for both math and verbal?
So it's been renormed a number of times. The big ones were in 2005. So 2005, they get rid of the 1,600 point scale and they go to the 2,400 point scale. And then ACT continues to just kind of take them out. So then they get rid of the 2,400 point scale, renorm again in 2016, and they just renormed. So the SAT now is only an adaptive test that you can take online, right? And so you talk about, Matthew, we started off this way. Look, the SAT, it's different for everybody now. If you do poorly on the first 4 or 5 questions, it navigates you into an
4 or 5 questions?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a different test for everybody.
On that a little bit, because this is very new.
This is brand new. The SAT was never adaptive until this year, and now they're only adaptive. And the ACT was never adaptive, and now they are only adaptive as well. And so if you do well on the first several questions, it's going to navigate you to a more difficult test. And if you do poorly, it's going to navigate you to an easier test, right? Now, this concept, adaptive testing, has been in play for 50 years. But again, this is another renorming. And you talk to any student that takes the CLT and either the SAT or ACT, 100% of the time they say, wow, that was harder than the SAT or the ACT. And I think this is what our service academies have to champion, is this return to meritocracy, a return to academic rigor.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But let me touch upon something that you mentioned, which was it's mind blowing, but then it's not. Harvard is offering remedial mathematics. What I think that is, and I work in the business space, is I think that's echoing what businesses are saying. I've heard engineers, hard engineers, saying, my new hires don't know the basics of engineering. It's like there's a big gap in their education. Okay. So that's remarkable. Now, you also talked about the learning centers of Rome, Jerusalem, and Athens. Okay. Now, from what I understand about classical learning, and this is big, this reflects the true ethos of the virtues of duty, honor, country. I understand the classical learning's goal is the search for truth.
Amen.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, let me ask you this: based, you talked about it a little bit. What would you say the current American education system's purpose is? Not the stated purpose, but the de facto current. What's really happening?
Yeah, I think the best way to get at this is to go into any classroom and to ask the students, what are we doing here? What's the point of school? You can go into an inner city school, go into an affluent suburban school, and they're all going to tell you the same thing 99% of the time. They're going to say something like, to get a better job. That's what students are going to say. Now, that is a very impoverished, that is a very impoverished vision for education, right? If you go into a classical school, they're going to say something like, to grow in virtue, to grow in wisdom, right? It's a different answer. And historically, the answer to get a better job is a very odd answer, right? C.S. Lewis says that if education, he meant classical education, is beaten by jobs training, civilization dies, right? I don't think C.S. Lewis was generally that hyperbolic, but civilization dies is the consequence. The irony of this kind of education is that we don't even know what the jobs are going to look like in 5 or 10 years, right? But employers will always need people who are grounded, are virtuous, have good character. The kind of people that West Point graduates are the kind of people that our employers need. But here's the paradox, Matthew, is that even though a classical education is not aimed at getting a job, they make the very best employees. They make the very best because they actually know how to think well. And they're going to do right by their employer.
Yeah. You touched on something. If anybody at MacArthur knows, I get incensed when we talk about this. And Dr. Ron Scott, retired Ron Scott, you know what I'm about to say if you're on this call. You mentioned virtue. Okay. Virtue, to understand it, I think, in this context, you have to say the word values. Virtues and values. Virtues are good and eternal. Values are subjective and corruptible. Okay. Duty, honor, country are virtues. And then if it's not a virtue, it's taking you off the path. Okay. So it is so fascinating how you ask all these students, you said 99, to get a good job. It sounds to me like when you're searching for the truth, you're going to be a better critical thinker. And something that's been missing, and quite frankly, it eluded us at the MacArthur Society. We didn't see that we were being attacked, our entire country, via removing us for our virtuous moorings, our moorings of virtue. And that's why the whole country got inflamed when we heard about the removal of duty, honor, country from the mission statement. We did not have the vocabulary for it, but if you could speak a little bit, and this is kind of a military tone, so you guys are on the front lines,
Sure.
Consider yourself knighted, okay? But could you speak about the importance of virtue in the context of the Marxists want to remove virtue from your society?
Yeah, and I've talked a lot, so I'll let Dr. Morrow chime in here in a second. But I would want to just say this part. It's interesting to me that in the history of the West, they often did not call it education. They called it formation. They called it formation. Well, what are they doing at the service academies? They're forming young men and women into certain types of people. You graduate from West Point and you're responsible. You get up at a normal hour. You make your bed, right? It's not the case at most of our other universities. So it's a formative education at West Point and others. And that's what we mean by these virtues.
Well, the goal, of course, is to develop leaders of character. Correct. I mean, these are terms that we hear thrown around, but they mean something to the service academies. And when you bring students in that arrive in a system that's not merit-based, they have different goals. Again, if you want to develop the kind of leaders that are going to take us through the challenges that our country is facing. I mean, we face challenges. We've gone through incredible wars, but we can't even grasp what's ahead of us. I mean, when we look at what's going on at Davos right now, I mean, the challenges just seem to grow and grow and grow. And we now more than ever have to look at what is the foundation of the system that our academies are based on. How are we developing our leaders? Are we developing our leaders with, again, this woke DEI mentality that you can get into this particular institution based upon something other than who you, I mean, even at 18, who you have decided you want to be and what you have put on the table to show West Point or Annapolis that you deserve to be there and that you're willing to fight for it and that you're willing to take a test like the CLT that demands a higher level of rigor, right? We mentioned the math part of CLT previously. The math has twice as many difficult questions on the CLT as it does on the SAT, and they've removed difficult questions and multi-pathway questions from the ACT recently. Again, why are we lowering the standards? We should be raising the bar. These kids want to be challenged. There are kids out there that want to be challenged. They want to work harder. They want to do their best, and they want to become leaders. But they're not even getting in the door. That's the problem. And we've got to be the megaphone, the mouthpiece to say, no, that's not the way it needs to be. We need to get the best of the best to lead, then more will follow. But you've got to develop leaders before you can raise everyone up. That's one of the biggest problems.
Sorry. And for those of you who didn't catch it, Dr. Susan Morrow is the Classical Learning Test Organization's liaison with service academies. So, Dr. Morrow, you said something that struck a chord in us when you say develop leaders of character. And, we've been talking about, should it be leaders of virtue? Because among our MacArthur Society and our two sister alumni societies, STARS and the Calvert Task Group, when we say that term, leaders of character, what defines character? It's been usurped. It's been redefined. And of the three military service academies, Annapolis, the Air Force Academy, and West Point, the Air Force Academy by far has been the worst attacked. DEI was elevated at very high at West Point, but at the Air Force Academy, they actually assigned DEI and DEI type officers who wore a purple rope to signify. It's almost like it was a second chain of command. And they elevated DEI to the level of honor. They were this close. So they basically redefined what character is. And they were this close, okay? Meaning a leader of character is a leader who is pro-DEI. So maybe, and this is maybe a shift in everything we're doing, folks, maybe we shouldn't say leaders of character. We should say leaders of virtue, okay? Now, even that would need further definition because I'm only one grad. There are many others and many more eloquent than I. When I think of a leader of virtue, I'll quote someone who didn't graduate from West Point, General Mike Flynn, who went to, who's now a member of the Board of Advisors. And he said, this is what a soldier should do, whether enlisted or an officer. In the middle of a firefight, he should be putting the business end of his weapon to work in the middle of a firefight. But if a child should come in the middle of the firefight, it happens. He should go get the child, shield it, put that child in safety, and get back to business. What you got is a warrior, and you got a person who is willing to be selfless and give their life. That is virtue in the context of West Point, and I think our sister service academies would agree. But what's happened, I think, and you're speaking our language, Dr. Morrow, and maybe this is something you can help us with, is it a leader of character we want to develop, or is it a leader of virtue? Because remember, virtue is good and eternal, but a value is subjective and corruptible. And that's from the context of West Point. Duty, honor, country is a virtue that every single West Point alumni and those close to us understand in a visceral way. So when you say, leaders of character, I think that, you're talking the right language. And right now, in real time, Dr. Morrow and Jeremy, in the context of classical learning, I think it is virtue. It is virtue. What are your thoughts on that, Jeremy, Dr. Morrow?
I don't disagree with what you're saying at all, but I think that these virtues, right, they are part of a person's character. Okay, I think of your person's character as the umbrella that incorporates duty and honor. So as your character development starts at a very young age, right? You're everything that your parents pour into you. It's a larger entity in my mind. And when you choose a path, what do you do when no one is looking? Right. So that when I'm talking about character, I'm talking about the overarching characteristics that a person has embodied and chosen to follow with their life, and with the actions and thoughts that guide them each and every day.
Okay. We've got a whole bunch of questions coming in, so this is going to be kind of rapid fire. Okay.
Yep.
We have about 7 or 8 minutes left. You have a little bit more time. You can stay with us.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
oh, yes, of course.
Okay, this is from Alicia Houston, USMA class of 2000. How is the CLT scored? What study or book or resources do you recommend for kids new to the test or tutors teaching it?
Yeah, it's a great question. CLT, we wanted to simplify the scoring process and what this means. So it's 120 questions, it's 120 points, and it's 120 minutes. And so there's 40, it's weighted 40, 40, 40, 40 verbal reasoning, 40 grammar writing, and then 40 quantitative reasoning as well.
Oh, amazing. Okay, next one. This is from Dan Schultz, USMA class of 78. You see, his class 78 was the last class to be issued plebe slide rules. We had to learn how to use both the slide rule and a new issued calculator. Dan, was it what the size of a brick, that calculator? I think that's just kind of a note. Okay, this is from Steve Wallingford, Air Force Academy, class of 74, and he was a USMA professor. If it is true that the CLT can be taken at home, what guards against an exam being taken by someone other than the individual whose name appears on the exam? Remember that due to the level of cheating in American high schools, good point, the Service Academy used this as a contributing factor to lowering the honor code standards.
Yeah, it's a great question. So CLT is remotely proctored. We've got students in the Dakotas and Alaska as well, but we do void. So it's remotely proctored by video. We do void on average about 20% of test takers' scores. So they sign an honor code, and any infraction at all, and they know this, the test is going to be voided. So we do want to have the highest possible standard we can for testing integrity. They have to show their ID as well. I personally have more confidence in our remote proctored system than the often the teacher proctoring the SAT or ACT, where a lot of times they're looking the other way.
Okay, great. So for Susan, you have a planned visit. Everybody, she has a planned visit to West Point in a month with the dean, my classmate. What is the purpose of your visit, and what do you hope to accomplish? Just from the MacArthur Society President, General Vallely.
So CLT, now that it's been introduced to the service academies, needs to be exposed, basically. So I need to spend time with the staff from the Department of Admissions. I need to spend time with every level of outreach at West Point. I need to spend time with your athletic director. Anyone that touches a potential candidate as they are going through the application process needs to know that CLT is an option. And as Secretary Hegseth said, it is the gold standard. It is literally the best option. If you want to show that you have what it takes to go to a STEM school, you want to show that you can do rigorous math, you take the CLT. So I need to talk to your field force. I want to train them. I need to show them basically what is the concordance between a CLT score and an SAT score, between a CLT score and an ACT score, because they have students coming to them saying, what test should I take? You know, what do I do to get into West Point? Well, these guys need to have answers regarding the CLT. So I have to provide them with answers, with information and resources, so they are prepared to support these potential candidates as well as they possibly can. So that is my job, to make certain that outreach is covered.
Oh my gosh, we have a whole bunch of questions, and I won't be able to get all, but I'll see. Okay, this is from our Vice President Sam Thiessen, USMA class of '73. West Point started as an engineering school and still remains very engineer oriented. How much does a CLT measure the STEM aptitude required for engineering?
Again, we're a third. Quantitative reasoning is the weight on the test. And I think anecdotally, when you talk to students, they're going to say that the math portion of the CLT was the hardest part. I think especially because they're not able to be dependent on a device as they are on the SAT or ACT.
Okay, and this is another one from Dave Bell, USMA class of '71. This is an amazing question. Jeremy, you said that the learning centers are Athens, Rome, and Jerusalem, which, two are non-secular, one is a religious center. And his question is, the basis of CLT seems to be religious. Is that correct?
I think that College Board and the ACT, I think they give students a distorted view of America, of the West, of Christianity, because they wrongly censor the Christian intellectual tradition. In fact, we did an audit of the SAT when we launched. We had a couple Princeton students on this, and they reviewed about 13 SATs. They found a grand total of 0 sources of their source material of their passages coming from Christian authors. And so I think this gives, America's founders were deeply rooted in the Western Christian intellectual tradition. I think that these things are very difficult to separate. So CLT, we're not a quote unquote Christian company, but we do want to put students in front of the best of what has been thought and said. And that includes many, many religious thinkers for sure.
Yeah, and I'll put out there that truth comes from God, virtue comes from God, that which is good and eternal.
Yeah.
And
Matthew,
right?
I'll add to that. We've had some states say, CLT features religious thinkers and Christian thinkers, and we're okay with that as long as you include a proportionate number of Islamic thinkers and Hindu thinkers. And CLT has said no, we're not going to do that. Yeah, those were not prominent players in the foundation of America.
Okay, thank you for standing up, because I've studied this, and Dr. Chuck DeRay, I might call on you a second, sir. He's one of our resident subject matter experts on understanding Marxism strategy and tactics and how to dismantle them at the molecular level. Dr. DeRay, thank you. He was the connector that brought us Jeremy Tate and Dr. Susan Morrow, so thank you. But what Jeremy just pushed back on was something vital to our country. Yeah, you can talk about religion, but we want to have this anti-God. So there'll be equity. Okay. I'm holding back right now from fussing. Okay. That is exactly how our enemies with the Marxist strategies get into our country. Just because, put it this way, if you got a 5%, cancer, you have a 100% problem. So Jeremy, I tell you what, if you were here right now, I'd shake your hand and punch you in the arm and say, thank you, soldier. Thank you, warrior, because this is a non-kinetic warfare and you are holding the line. So Dr. Chuck DeRay, thank you. Do you have a question? We've got a couple, maybe a minute or two more. Could you add something to this?
No, I just wanted to say I've talked to a bunch of national leaders, including Barney Charter Initiative. You know, the Hillsdale College is putting in the secondary schools in K through 12 to Jeremy and Susan. I got to tell you, you come highly recommended. I think the big question for us, for many of us graduates, whether we're educators or not, is the corruption of data. We've seen, you guys know the Lucy Calkins Balanced Literacy Program. That program that curriculum has destroyed so many students, approximately 1/3. Even Massachusetts has launched a fraud investigation and a lawsuit against them. And of course, we had alignment with Columbia's Teachers College through the Department of Basic Sciences and Leadership. So a lot of us as graduates are very sensitive to the corruption of data. Can you explain just briefly how the CLT is not corrupted? Back to you guys.
Yeah, and Dr. Dre, can you kind of elaborate a bit on what you mean by the corruption of data?
Sure. Like, one of the big things is how does equity and Marxism creep into the SAT and ACT, and what programs and policies do you have in place to prevent that from happening with the CLT?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I would start with, we were in this conversation about virtue 10 minutes ago or so. And in the West, of course, the virtues were always very well defined for more than a millennia. You think just, the four cardinal virtues of fortitude, prudence, justice, and temperance. What is the chief virtue, right? In the kind of DEI Marxist mindset that they push in schools. The chief virtue is what they call tolerance, right? And what tolerance ends up doing is creating this animosity towards merit and towards excellence. And so when a lot of students, and I spent 10 years in our public schools, when they're being coached up for their college essay, well, what do they want to focus on? They're taught to focus on all of their setbacks. They want to present themselves as having the most setbacks, right? Wow. And this is the victim hierarchy. The victimhood hierarchy is real, and unfortunately, it made its way into the service academies as well. So, we see this especially show up on the SAT essay part. But I think just overall, the lowering of academic standards that we saw with the revision in 2015 to 16, where every student, they had a concordance that said, if you took it in 2015, here's your score in 2016, and everybody got around 80 points depending on where you were at in the curve. Wow. So I think moving towards this, everybody gets an A, kind of feel-good assessment concept.
Yeah, I'm amazed. Thanks, a great question. Do you have time for one more?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you touched on something. It's the victim. What's your rank in victimhood? That's amazing, because my kids both are going to college, and all of these scholarships, it's a race to who is the most victimized, not what you've achieved necessarily. So, but one more question is from Tom Oakley, West Point class of 2000. Tom, thank you for being here and asking the question. An excellent one, and we'll wrap it up. How can the United States Military Academy determine the merit of an applicant who takes the CLT versus the merit of one who takes the SAT or ACT if the tests are so fundamentally different?
That's a great question. I want Dr. Marr to comment on this as well, because her daughter was homeschooled, went to the U.S. Naval Academy. Look, if the tests are entirely different, you can't have what's called a concordance chart. You cannot compare the scores. And so at the end of the day, we are all three, SAT, ACT, CLT, we're all trying to get at verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning as well. And there has to be a degree of similarity for sure, even though there can be some difference in that. But look, CLT, I think, is part of a much larger movement, a real renaissance in homeschooling in America. There's more than 1,000 classical schools that have all launched in the past 25 years. And they looked at the College Board, they looked at the SAT, and there was a real demand for something to call their own. They didn't want to look towards to the failing, really public school system right now to say we're going to be taking our academic standards. There is a demand for a new set of academic standards that were coming out of this movement. And Susan, PhD to homeschool mama, very much a part of this.
Well, when you decide at whatever age that you want to pursue a military academy, you realize, and my daughter did that at 11, and we were at graduation at the Air Force Academy, and she said, this is where I'm going to school. I said, all right, then your life has just changed because you are going to have a higher bar. you are going to have to work harder. You are going to have to develop your leadership, your athletic and your academic skills in order to even be considered for an academy. And you're going to have, now she couldn't obviously take the CLT because it wasn't accepted then, but you're going to have to do hard things if you want to be considered a leader for this country. I mean, this is where the country's leaders are born, right? And there are a lot of kids that want that, and they're going to see that there's a new way to do that. When you have 30,000 kids a year that are getting a 33 to a 36 on the ACT, how do you separate out an academy class? You can't. In the past 10 years, there's been one perfect CLT score, okay? Thousands of perfect SATs, thousands and thousands of perfect ACTs, 1 in 10 years. That's the upper level. That's how you're going to discern who are the kids that really did read great books and participate in Socratic dialogue and do the things that stuck. They worked, they read, they cared enough to go that extra mile. That's who you want, right? And you will see that by their scores. You will see that by the way that they look you in the eye when they go before a congressional board, and they can talk to you because they've spent time. They were fortunate enough to have a mom or a group of educators that taught them how to converse and how to think and how to care about things that really matter. Truth, goodness, beauty. Those are the things.
I love that. Matthew, if I could add just one more comment. There was a question earlier about prep. And CLT really, really wants to push back against the whole concept of test prep. The test prep is really a good and a sound education. The longest passage right now, the longest on the SAT is 120 words. The shortest is 25 words. CLT, 600 words to 700 word passages. They're reading from the Federalist Papers. They're reading from John Locke. They're reading from maybe Aristotle's Politics or Plato's Republic, right? And students that have grown up and have learned to grapple with these kinds of texts that are foundational to Western civilization, they're going to do really well. You know, students, I mean, Ivy League professors, this was in the Atlantic, saying that students, the majority of their students coming into Ivy Leagues, having never read an entire book cover to cover at the Ivy League. But the good news is that there is this silver lining, and it's happening in some public schools in places like Louisiana. Cade Brumley's the superintendent. He's fighting to bring this kind of education to the public schools there. But it's happening with all of these classical charter schools. The Barney charter is connected to Hillsdale College, 100%. Dr. Duray just mentioned that. This renaissance in homeschooling. We've gone from 13,000 to over 5 million homeschoolers over the past 50 years. It's exploded. And they can't, they're starting classical schools as quickly as they can. And these students are going to be great fits, we believe, at the service academies.
That's great. You're singing virtue, and I tell you what, but when I hear both of you speak, Susan, what you just shared was like a motivational talk to get into a service academy. It was amazing. For those of you listening, you're probably getting motivated. I know I was. What you both have shared with us echoes what thought leaders in these three organizations, Colonel retired and PhD Ron Scott from STARS, I think you know him, Naval Captain Brent Ramsey from the Calvert Task Group, and one of many, I mentioned Dr. Chuck DeRay and Colonel retired Bill Prince, who is a warrior and a scholar. He actually received the highest combat award in the CIA. He's no longer a spook. I talk about it. And he is a great thinker, a man of virtue. So you are amongst ideological family. We're so grateful. And for those of you, there were so many questions. Thank you for asking those. What we're going to do, if it's okay with you, Dr. Morrow and Jeremy, is we're going to send you these questions. And if you could answer them, we appreciate that. So thank you so much. Everyone's on mute, but if you give me a thumbs up or clap, we appreciate that. Let's see. So we're going to transition now. Thank you so much. We hope to have you back. Please come back.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, and success to your meeting with the West Point Dean next month, Dr. Morrow. We'd love to hear how that goes.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.